Hi, Adrian. Welcome to the MVP Engineer podcast. I was excited to talk to you. You do some fractional CTO work as well and wanted to talk a little bit about DevOps and some other topics. So, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself and, yeah, tell us a little bit about what you've been up to the last couple of years.
Thanks, first of all, for having me, William. Yes, I'm there for already 24 years in professional business when it comes to software development and around 15 years of being responsible. So I myself am, let's say, a small business entrepreneur, but we are working with quite large companies, medium-sized to large companies in the European, especially German area. And I doing a lot of, let's say, I help a lot of fellow CTOs out there with my knowledge I gathered over the time. The mistakes I made a lot of mistakes. So I'm talking a lot about those mistakes and insights on LinkedIn and videos and newsletter, all this kind of stuff. And I'm really looking forward to help others to not fall into the traps I felt in the past. And I have, let's say, various of topics I'm about. It's starting from cloud native, DevOps, engineering culture and tech, all this kind of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff interesting me. And yes, this is actually the reason why I'm here today, talking about
Awesome.
those things. Exactly. This is me.
Yeah, I love it. Um, yeah, I'm curious a little bit about the localization into Berlin and stuff, but let's start with some cloud native stuff. Did I see that you're more attuned to Azure and working with Azure a bunch?
And not so much. I'm actually, I was AWS person for
Right.
quite a while, but we moved since that was the time when Kubernetes was a big thing, some years ago, and everyone was moving to one of the big cloud providers. But I told that
Oh,
already.
you're doing the DigitalOcean thing.
I'm
Got it.
doing DigitalOcean, so actually
Awesome.
I'm a DigitalOcean business partner already,
Awesome.
and because we figured out that the context of small to medium-sized business and startups doesn't fit very well to the public cloud providers. So many people are running into burnouts there at some point in time.
Give me the pitch for DigitalOcean because I've done some work on DigitalOcean and I might be a little bit contrarian here, at least from your perspective.
Yes.
So I'd love to hear why you want people or just what DigitalOcean has to offer.
So basically,
And the disclaimer here is also that Adrian makes a little bit of kickback, I think, because you're working with them directly. I think
yes. Yeah, I would say so. Yes,
that's
that's
fine.
totally
That's fine.
fine.
I just want to give the disclaimer. But tell us why we should use DigitalOcean because I I don't like it honestly. So tell me what I
It's good.
missed.
It's good to know because then I have some feedback as well. So DigitalOcean is basically the platform for small businesses because it provides services like, for example, the app platform, which is basically a platform where you basically be able to reduce stress for your development team, especially when you want to go DevOps for small businesses, where you most often don't have ops personnel, so you don't have ops people, and sometimes you have seniors doing some kind of Linux stuff, for example, but that's not enough to run Kubernetes, to do IIM on AWS and all this kind of stuff. And they have a software service which is called the app platform. And this is basically a game changer for small to medium sized businesses and especially on startups because you can basically run there everything from Jamstacks to larger microservice applications focused entirely on development. So this is basically what I like as a CTO. So I'm CTO myself with all our products. We have that there as well because we can focus on creating value instead of hustling around with Kubernetes and all this kind of orchestrators out there.
Interesting. What's the gem stack? What's that stack you mentioned?
It's the app platform actually. So this is basically a platform as a service environment. So you can, of course, run Kubernetes and droplets as well, but we don't use them. So we've basically gone over. This was the reason why we gone away from AWS as well because it was too complicated for us, our products and our clients. And
Yeah.
on DigitalOcean, it is like you can really be even a junior developer and working end to end in the DevOps area from code, check-in, pipelining, even up to the networking part, because the networking part is so easy down that you can actually you don't need to be an ops professional to actually
Yeah.
operate that. This is great.
All right. Interesting. So you're saying without a DevOps team, you could deploy and run your app and your website.
Exactly.
I don't know. For me, it would have to be like Apple and just work, right? I ran into a couple of like what I saw were relatively simple bugs that like made it impossible to do the deploy. And then when I looked into the configuration and say, hey, let me do this, this, and this, I forget the specifics, but I assumed it was like GCP. I do a lot of work on GCP.
Hmm.
So I said, hey, I could change this configuration, or I could open up this port on the firewall or whatever, or do this thing. And as long as I do that, then we can check the problem and fix the problem.
Hmm.
And I didn't have the configuration options. And then it still didn't work. And you get really frustrated because you're like, I could fix this. I know the problem, but it's not allowing me to do it. And again, like I can see why there's value if it just works, right? But in general, I'm doing like more advanced deploys.
Hmm.
And the reason I like GCP is GCP has almost all the options that AWS has with more simplicity. I don't know how familiar you are with GCP, but I agree that AWS is too complicated. And what I mean by complicated is there's three ways to do the same thing, right? Like there largely there's no preferred way to do one thing. And when there's no preferred way, or there's like slightly preferred, like 20% better, it becomes really muddled. And you talk to four different developers, they do it the way that they did it last time, not the preferred way. And when
Hmm.
you do it the preferred way, everybody knows what you're going to do because it's the easy, best thing to do, right? So I agree DigitalOcean has less options. I'm kind of thinking the way that you pitched it is a little bit like Heroku. Are you familiar with Heroku?
Yes, it is. I'm very familiar with Heroku, and even DigitalOcean is working with some
With
stack
them?
of Heroku on the app platform.
Yeah. So in Heroku, you have a lot of Rails and Ruby uh, development, and it makes it really easy to deploy. And from my experience with Heroku, it was really easy. Not much configuration, not much to do. The problem that we see with Heroku is you deploy it real quick
Mhm.
and it works real well, and then you start scaling, and then the costs skyrocket. Right? It's just like impossible to keep it running when you have a million users because Heroku is just so expensive once you start to
Mhm.
get to scale, right? So I don't know if DigitalOcean has that problem. It's probably more expensive than GCP because GCP is so fine grained in like exactly how it bills that the other ones just have to be more expensive. But there's always, if you're getting ease of use and it works for you, there's a reason to go for it. So give me a quick compare and contrast from your perspective on Heroku and DigitalOcean.
So I would like to stick quickly with DigitalOcean because there are some specific aspects to
Yeah.
that. And this is, for example, so first of all, you have the idea of that you actually have this one package. You just have your, let's say, your Docker Compose file, you convert it into an app spec file, and you're good to go. So everything else is handled for you, like the load balancer, like the domain thing, the networking, the repositories, even up to metrics, networking, SLA, and all this kind of stuff. So this is all managed for you, except WAF at the moment. So WAF is not an option. So you need to do that by yourself. This is a little bit pain at the moment, but it will be fixed as well in the future. And for example, so when you start with your app, so in the beginning you're always quite small. Then you have, let's say, those containers they're running. So you basically bill, bill on the go. So basically pay on the go. And the point is in the beginning, it's quite cheap. And of course, as soon as you scale, it's get a little bit more expensive than you would have run it on your own. But you need to, the total cost of ownership. This is quite, important there. So first of all, you don't have ops personnel, so you don't need to hire someone who's doing that for you. This is a big thing for small companies, especially starting companies, because when I look back, when we had our first, let's say, consultants for AWS, it got expensive pretty quick, and you don't have
Yep.
that there. This is the first point. And the other point is metrics and logging. When it takes something like Datadog, you can basically create an intake and push everything with a sidecar container in other solutions to Datadog. You can do that in the app platform as well. They basically have a feature for that, but you already have that in the platform without paying anything extra. So you have metrics, you have alerts, Slack alerts, you have logging, all this kind of stuff. Of course, this is not as good as Datadog, for example, but especially for the beginning, it's enough, and especially the metrics are enough. And this is what I think, especially for smaller companies in the beginning, this is a very good solution. But I have to say, I don't say that you should scale with that infinitely, even if a platform does provide auto scaling as well. It might make sense to, on some point, thinking about the Kubernetes cluster with some kind of platform as a service middleware solution on top of that. You know?
Yeah. So you talk a lot about culture as well, and specifically like early stage SMB tech culture.
Mhm.
So talk to me about ownership a little bit, and we talked a little bit about developer responsibility from the end to end and ensuring quality delivery and just ownership in general. So talk to me about your perspective on that. How do you frame that in the discussion, in the broader discussion, and just um,
So I
yeah,
think
go ahead.
engineering culture or culture in tech in general is a very important aspect. Many people of us miss because when you follow discussions on LinkedIn, wherever, in some social, some form of social media, most people focus on the operational and tactical aspects of technology. So, for example, should you go with continuous delivery? Should you go with trunk-based development or Git flow or whatever? So people focus on the operational parts, but not so much on the actual cultural parts. So when we take a look at, for example, we've mentioned DevOps already, which is actually a culture. We just see there we have the end-to-end responsibility. So I'm a big fan of having software developers there, which thinking from the beginning, so basically from the ticket to the deployment and basically, let's say, running the application, um, this whole responsibility leads to a form of ownership when you practiced it right. And if you foster that as a tech lead, as a CTO, as a VP of engineering, from day one on into your teams, then you will get a lot of let's say responsibility, and resulting of that, a lot of maturity as well. And as soon as you have those both things in place, you can even, think about, let's say, rapid development with trunk-based development, where you even reduce, for example, the pull requests and code reviews. This is what I've wrote a lot and often about. We had some live streams about that as well. And those are very important aspects. So the more you let the people do, the more responsibility you basically want from them, the more mature they become, and the more value you create in your process, because you can become faster with what you do. You have a better progress, and progress is the foundation of happiness in the end.
Well, you're
Because
talking a little bit about like employee development, right?
Mhm,
And giving more responsibility. Um, for me, a lot of the like for me, sometimes it's not giving more responsibility, but giving too much, and
mhm,
then them not having the ownership to take it to the finish, right? So one of the core tenets of my company is over the finish line. If it's not
mhm,
completed and can show that it's working and ready to hand off to the next player or ready to hand off to the next guy, like why like it's just not ready yet. So how do you foster that kind of ownership where it's not just send the pull request but prove that it's done? Send me a Loom video of the feature complete working, right?
mhm.
uh, we're in MVPs and in early stage software, we don't have a whole separate QA department. Like we're all QAing together and the developer has to make sure that it's
Yeah.
completed, right? So how do you foster that culture in the company to say, hey, over the finish line?
This is very important to understand. So my focus is from the CTO side. So this is what I've done most of my time, and I think it's first of all, the business already must be aligned and connected, and this is the task of the CTO, and then comes the VP of engineering, but who needs to take this strategy and drill it down into tactical and operational aspects as well, which means that we cannot have a rigid business and in agile development, and then force the people to you know um, have an agile development without proper briefings, and then get it out before deadline. So this is the first thing. So culture starts from the top and is going down to the bottom, not bottom up. So this is very important to not to give the developers the sense of control. This is the first thing. And then of course, it's we're talking a lot about the idea of continuous delivering to stay in process and progress. And I think this is very important, a very important cultural aspect as well. So, of course, the people and the developer need to cultivate their sense of ownership. And this is very important, and they need to have some form of responsibility. But responsibility and accountability are two different parts. So as long as they develop their stuff in a responsible way, and they talk about that often, communicate often, to your team lead about what you're doing. So even if you have not finished 100% of the task, deliver what you already have and communicate this. This will reduce stress. This is what you need to do in order to reduce stress, because everyone up to the business area, business section, will know then we are in progress. And that's okay if it takes a week longer, as long as we are in progress, because most people make the severe, let's say it's a big problem, that they actually have 0%, in the perspective of business people, have 0% on the deadline and saying we are soon ready, but no one can see something. So you need to
Yeah.
deliver what you
It's about
have on this day.
transparency. It's
Exactly.
transparency because I hear that so many times. The developers are just like, yeah, we're close, we're close, we're close. Nobody wants to show off shitty work.
Yeah.
And I hate it. I hate it. Show off your shitty work. Everyone works. Everyone knows what shitty works looks like. Everyone knows
Yeah.
everyone knows that progress is progress. But they're ashamed of themselves. They're ashamed that it's not perfect.
But then they run into the stressful situation where they basically deliver
No,
nothing.
everybody's
Nothing is
stressed.
better than worse.
The business owner is stressed. The tech lead is stressed. And the developer is stressed. Everybody's stressed.
Mhm.
But if the developer shows the tech lead, this is where we're at, the tech lead can say, hey, try this, try this, try this. Then the developer gets unblocked. The business owner knows that the tech lead's on it, and
Mhm.
everybody's stress is reduced.
Exactly. That's
How do
that's
we
great to hear.
okay, how do we reverse all of human nature? Help me with this one, Adrian.
Can you repeat that? I don't really understand the question.
How how do we get rid of shame?
Okay. Blameless environment and be shamed. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's
No, but it's not it's more than blameless environment because you can have blameless environment and people still feel shame that their code is shitty, right? I mean, I was trained at Google, and Google does a really good job of a blameless culture, really good job,
yeah.
especially in certain teams. And
I would say first of all, I prefer when you don't have any form of asynchronous code reviews, because it is harder
you
to
do
push.
synchronous code reviews,
Synchronous, yeah, one for
really interesting.
pair programming or something like that. The reason being is exactly what you just say. I want my developers to talk to me or some team leaders about their ongoing process. What was problematic, what was not problematic, for example. So where they stuck,
Adrian,
where they
you're
don't.
you're in Berlin. Where are your developers?
I'm not in Berlin. I'm basically southern Germany.
Oh, okay, that's Berlin. At least to me. Sorry,
Okay.
I don't mean to be disrespectful, but I
All
mean,
good. All good.
if you flew to New York City from Berlin, you live in Berlin, right?
Okay, yeah,
Um,
okay. No, I'm actually living in southern Germany, and
awesome.
my developers are, the half of them are basically in Germany or remote, and the other
Yeah,
half is in Europe, all remote.
understood. Well, here's the problem with synchronous code reviews for me.
Hmm.
My developers are in Africa,
Hmm. Okay, this
and
is
it's
this
just
is a
it's so
problem. Yeah.
tough. It's so tough to try and get the time zones to work. Everything in the and my team leads are in India, so they're just on completely different time zones, completely different sides of the world. And this is why I do what I call geography arbitrage. It's just
Mhm.
you find the people that are not living in Berlin. Berlin's an expensive city, and Germany's an expensive country, right? So it's better than New York City or Miami, but finding developers there is a harder task than finding cheap quality developers in Africa, India, uh, Romania, right? So the synchronous thing is so tough, but it is still tough to get the blameless and to get the transparency with asynchronous. It's just a very difficult problem. Um, so let's see. Fostering maturity in the development culture. Uh, do you want to talk about junior developers and leveling them up, or just maturing the entire org? What do you have to say about that?
Um, those topics are actually quite connected to each other.
Okay.
So maybe I start with a junior to senior thing. I have a very special idea of what to focus on, and this
Okay.
is the average developer, which you could mean is the intermediate or mid-level developer. And the reason being for that is that the junior developers need a realistic target, and the senior developers need someone to actually mentor. So, and this is my idea of creating a healthy environment, a beneficial, supportive environment where, for example, those problems we've mentioned in the question before wouldn't actually take part. And the idea is that when you join these days a junior developer in an organization, it's quite tough. There are so many, let's say, technologies these days, so many principles you need to follow, so many. Maybe you're in an environment which is highly, into some complicated DevOps things and stuff like that. There's so much to learn, and you need to have something, let's say, which is not senior as your goal, because there are so many years in between you and in between now and then that intermediate spot is the right thing. And Jonathan Schultz from LinkedIn had a very good terminology for that, and that this is basically the cultural requirements. So you set up cultural requirements for the average developer. So this is how I coined it. And when you have that, the let's say that this is what you actually expect. This is the workhorse of your team, is the average developer. A junior developer does have a chance to get in 1 or 2 years to this position, and the senior developers have basically the task to foster this entire process to get this done. And the good thing about that is when you have this in place, then you basically can split your teams. You can scale with that because the amount of senior developers per team can be lower, because you focus that the average developer is fostered in a way, empowered in a way, enabled in a way to work on this own on most of the tasks. So you don't need to overly rely on senior developers. Now, this is the first thing I would implement as formal for culture, so that it's not about pay grades. I'm not talking about pay grades. In most small businesses, you don't have that anyway. But I'm talking about the idea of what is a junior, what is a mid-level, and what is a senior. And for the junior, the senior is not the goal. It is the mid-level. And this is important to understand.
I hear you. Yeah, so what's the roadmap for this mid-level average engineer? Like, I understand that there's the different levels and that you want to focus on the mid-level guy,
Mhm.
because that's going to be the like majority where we're getting the biggest bang for our buck, right? But like, what's the roadmap for that guy? How do we level him up, and what does that mean? Are we going mid to senior, or what do you mean by that?
I made a series about that last week, so there are 3 big posts and a large article about that.
Yeah,
But in general, it is so the average developer should be, by definition, able to do most, let's say, tasks which are, let's say, seen as default in his team, should be able to do them on his or herself. Basically, yeah, you can
sure,
say that. And there's only, let's say, some specific parts, like more complex architecture, let's say, interdisciplinary things where the average developer then is consulting a senior, and this is actually what you try to achieve. So you have a set of requirements which you need. For example, if you're working in a front-end related team, you should be able to use your React stack with Next.js fully. You should be able to configure it. You should be able to deploy it. You should be able to understand the pipelining. You should be able to fix bugs, solve outages and all this kind of stuff. So this is something you can, create some requirements
well,
for
that's
your
gonna be
context.
that's gonna be like the goals of the mid-level, but like,
Yeah.
what do you tell them to get from where they are to where they have to be? I mean, I guess it depends on the developer, but like, can you give us an example and like talk about some of the advice that you would give to one of
To
those
a junior
developers?
then, or to a
Oh,
mid-level.
sure. I mean, you're saying that the average guy or the
Mhm.
average mid level is the one that we want to be focusing most of our attention on. It's about like teaching to the middle of the class, right?
Right.
Um, so pick what's an average problem that the average developer has, and how do you solve it for them, or how do you level them up on that specific skill set?
Okay. So we could just take, for example, something which goes beyond coding. So I
Sure,
expect this
absolutely.
average developer to be proficient with coding everything inside his IDE, but as soon as
Sure.
probably deploys, for example, and there is a problem. Let's take npm. We have a build locally, it's working, and you push it to your pipeline, and there it's not working because there is a problem with package, node version, or something like that.
Sure.
I would expect
Those are
average
nightmares.
developer. Exactly, I would expect an average developer to try to fix that, and see that as some part of more, let's say, more seniority, yeah, more seniority thing actually to solve, but try it on some point. We sometimes say just take 15 minutes. If you don't get it done, ask someone else because otherwise it gets too expensive. But try it, try to solve it. And when you don't get it, ask someone, because this is, the let's say the responsibility and the ownership and the maturity again is you
Yep.
need to know when to ask and consult someone, and not covering up that you're sitting there for 3 hours not capable of solving that. So try it for
Yep.
yourself and tell someone, I wasn't able to, tell me how, and then learn it and make
So
something out of the learning.
I agree with that. I agree with that kind of cultural statement of try first, right? The way that I would talk about it, or I would take it to the next level and say, don't ask questions. Like I tell my team, don't ask me questions. I don't want questions from you. What I want from you is a task that you couldn't solve and everything that you did to try to solve it,
Mm-hmm.
right? And by doing that, I can say, oh, they tried this, this, and this is what I would have tried, and here's what I'll try next. But if you just ask me a question, I'm not here to solve your problems. I can't get my npm to go out to the production environment.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, great. Who cares? Like, why are you asking me? Here's what I did. Here's the error I received. I googled it. I saw 3 results. None of them worked, and I'm still stuck here. Okay, I can work with that. Change to an older version of npm.
Mm-hmm.
Let's deploy with a different library. Let's use a different version of Ubuntu. Let's uh,
Mm-hmm.
let's consult the owners of the library. Let's I don't know. That's what I got on that one. But like the options are very varied and different. And this is something that I love about being the tech lead is that you get to just choose different parts of the stack to solve the problem. Because a lot of times the code is just broken, right? Like it's possible there's just an error in the library or the lib
Mm-hmm.
or the package version is mismatched with some other version that you're doing, and it's just a complete shit show. Because that's just the reality. So many of these libraries are just broken, right? So we have to think creatively and solve it. And if you can't solve it from the first 3 results on Google, you might need a more creative solution rather than just banging your head against the wall,
Mm-hmm. But the
or
communication
or wait
part
for
is
the next
important
version.
afterwards.
Say it again.
But the communication is very important, to not cover it up, start communicating. And I like your point when you say that, don't ask me a question, tell me what you've done, because this is actually, you stay basically in the flow. So you go to him or you're
I
her
hate
and then
questions.
go back and
I
just
hate
just don't
questions. You know
describe.
what? You know how you never ask a stupid question?
Don't ask it.
Don't ask questions. Right? I mean, that's what I think. So you think a lot about platforms and platform as a service. I don't even know what that is. Tell me what a platform as a service is. Give us a definition here.
So there are some definitions out there. Actually, I give you mine. So
Yeah.
I've talked about already about the app platform, and a platform as a service for me is, let's say, in the perspective of a developer, it is a platform where I basically can work with my development skills to be able to deploy and run my application. So the DevOps idea, I build it, I run it. I run it on this platform. So this platform basically does provide me everything I need. So in larger companies, the platform as a service is the artifact, the result, the product of the platform engineering team. For smaller companies, it can be like something like the app platform, like Vercel
Aren't you
for
so
smaller
aren't you
companies.
talking about platform as a service as for in the context of the business of dev tools? Because don't you consider Salesforce a platform as a service?
It is a platform as a service as well. Of course, I was in the context of software development and development
Okay, yeah,
lifecycle.
yeah, yeah. Okay, I just wanted to make that clear for the audience that platform as a service is kind of separate from dev tools, and I think you're really focused in on dev tools and dev tooling because that's what you're living and breathing every day is the
Mhm.
development life cycle, which is fair. But that's why I asked for your definition and not the broader definition. So in the context of dev tooling, platform as a service can be a system that's letting us deploy our code and do those things.
Mhm.
So talk to me about solving burnout for with a platform as a service tool. Are you talking specifically about DigitalOcean again? I'm not. Maybe if you want to touch on that briefly. I don't want to make this into too much of a
Mhm.
pitch. But if you want to bring the platform as a service into the context
Mhm.
of how we deploy, that would be nice and helpful.
Okay. So developer burnout. So when we take a look at the state of DevOps report this year, then we read a lot about let's say burnout, which was related to DevOps or other companies telling that as well. In my opinion, let's say the platform made be platform engineering, platform as a service, was not built in the idea or it was not fitting the idea of the developer. So when you force a developer, to in his or her time frame, let's say which is 40 hours a week, let's take this as context, and you say now instead of only developing in that time, you need to do all the ops stuff as well, but you don't have more time for that. You still have the same deadlines, but you suddenly need to apply new skills you may not have at the moment. For example, suddenly you need to manage your Kubernetes cluster yourself to get some kind of pipelining there and so all that kind of stuff. And this, especially when you then go into new architectures like microservices and you're not proficient with that, you cannot concentrate on creating microservices because you have already problems with all the ops stuff around that. And this is where platforms help you, and yeah, basically help you to get this running without building up all these ops skills. So it basically takes away the burden of knowing ops um, more than an average level. So even with the basic software development skills, with a good platform as a service, you should be able to do end to end DevOps. This is what I think.
Fair enough. Um, cool. We wanted to talk a little bit about microservices as well, and
Mhm.
you think or you're an advocate for having more microservices early stage in the product lifecycle. Can you tell me why you think that? I think that we should deploy in a microservice, but you don't necessarily need to have like three different Docker containers to have a solid architecture. It really depends on the app.
Mhm.
But tell me your perspective on microservice deployment and why we should go with that.
Most discussions about microservice versus monolith was they are always about the operational and technical aspects. And again, I'm
Okay.
thinking from the business aspects and strategic aspect down to the tactical ones. And the reason being for that is my perspective is long term. I'm a long term business owner. Let's say a long term planner. So what I do is I don't say, okay, this application is probably going into MVP and then maybe it has some life after that. So I always thinking that okay, this solution will live for a long time, and then I have I define my requirements and especially qualities, so non-functional requirements. And one of them, my personal favorite is substitutability. It's not scalability like most people say; it's substitutability. And the
Ooh,
reason
I like
being
that.
and the reason being is, for example, we had a product right now in development for a larger client that we were starting with. It does have an e-commerce aspect to it, but it's not an e-commerce platform. And there is let's say, a context about e-commerce shop, and we decided to go with a open source solution for that. And in the midst of the development, we realized that this will not work. We saw
Yeah.
that we needed to build too much stuff around that, and then we just basically wrote our own microservice which substituted that one. And this is something you should do or should be able to do in 5 years as well. So this is my favorite quality, so that the application never ever become a legacy application. So this is the first one. And another very
One
important.
second,
Yeah.
let me just make a comment on that. I love that substitute versus scalability because people focus too much on wanting to get to so many users given
Mhm.
a given architecture. And you have this given architecture and you're just like, okay, like this has to work to a million. But it's relatively easy to scale them horizontally and vertically if you have the code just working.
Mhm.
But the thing that's more risky and worse is when the library breaks down and it doesn't do what you're hoping for. If it's just not able to fulfill the duty that it was granted,
Mhm.
right? So being able to architect by keeping libraries kind of siloed. So a lot of the things that I build require integrating 2 or 3 or 4 libraries. And we're not building that much code for these businesses. What we're doing is we're integrating the libraries. And what you have to do is architect it so the libraries are segregated and, like you said, separated, right? Or
Mhm.
substitutable. So that way you can break one out and put another one in, or maybe break one out and put two in its place, or break one out and write it yourself,
Mhm.
right? And especially when you get big and somebody says, hey, you're using this open source library for a commercial tool, then you have to go and build it yourself. So you better have made it so that it's substitutable, right?
Exactly.
So I love that attitude. I love that idea.
This is
That's
basically the
that's
foundation of composable architecture or MAC
yeah,
architecture.
yeah,
Yeah.
composable. That's fine, but I'm a little bit afraid of just calling everything a microservice because you don't for me a microservice is like a Docker deploy. It's like one Docker container.
Mhm.
Do you have a different definition for microservice? What would you call as a microservice?
So microservice for me is a standalone mini application which fulfills one single service, does have its own persistence layer, even if it's the same, let's say, database server, but you
Why
still
does it
have.
need a persistence layer? Like you can architect a monolith that is deployed as a microservice
Mhm.
and have uh, a library that you created that has a pip deploy, and you have another thing that has a persistent layer, and then you have another thing that's just a Python class that has a bunch of things
It doesn't.
integrating a third one.
Sorry. It doesn't need to
But
have a persistent layer. It
oh, it
does
doesn't need
have
to.
its own persistent. So if it does have one, it must be isolated from the others. So this is the.
Understood. Understood.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's
Yeah.
basically loose coupled. So let's say couple and cohesion. So just follow those principles in that
Yeah.
case.
Understood.
And what I really prefer as well on a microservice is basically asynchronous communication. So no direct API calls. Do it via message queuing, message bus, Kafka, something like that. So
Okay. I love
this is
that.
something as well. But so the difference between, let's say, we could, for example, when we are in a pass again, we can of course deploy several services which are actually several containers or services running next to each other, communicating with the message bus. Those, could you don't really necessarily need to have the full qualification of a microservice to run them. It's already
Mhm.
better to let's say run them in separate services because of the substitutability. Because I
Yep.
don't believe in discipline over time. So I never saw that. I know not even for me, for myself. I don't trust myself in that. So I think that teams have fluctuations, cuts in budget, new leadership, entirely new teams, outsourcing, inshoring, all this kind of stuff. And your initial, let's say, architecture, especially in a, for example, modular monolith, for example, will basically, uh, let's say, it will be challenged over time, especially after the first month, let's say 6 to 7 months, and it starts to be, let's say, coupled on spots you don't want to have coupling. And this is basically the beginning of the end, the beginning of the legacy dead end. And this is
Yep.
what because let's say in the last 15 years, the biggest pain point and the greatest money dump I ever made was running into so many legacy dead ends, one after another. And I
Yep.
personally never want to go back into that situation. It's a different
Yep.
story for a startup, which might get millions of funding afterwards and can rebuild everything. But most companies can't do that and should not. This is just the idea
Well,
of
you don't want
freedom.
to raise funds. You don't want to raise funds and say, "Hey, the money is to redo what I just did." That's just messed up. Like,
Exactly.
why? What?
Why do you want to migrate your
We're not
solution
doing that.
one year after you just wrote it? So it doesn't make sense.
None of my customers have ever done that. They raise a lot of money and then they continue working on the code base. It just doesn't make sense. All right. I've seen a bunch of mangroves in my life, but you mentioned something about a strangler fig approach, and the strangler fig looks really cool if you look at the photos of it. Um, but we're talking about legacy migrations and picking apart an application piece by piece and kind of feature by not even feature by feature, but like kind of API call by API call and replace it as you go. Can you talk to us a little bit about the strangler fig approach?
The Strangler-Fick approach is basically a migration approach to modernize your application somewhere else, which means it's very important to understand you basically Strangler-Fick to another system. For example, you have a 10 years old monolith application which is written in PHP, running on an Apache server somewhere on some VMs, which are in a data center, for example. And you just realized you stagnant with that application. You cannot create, and you are not in progress anymore. So everyone is unhappy about that. And you want to do something about that, but you can't because maintainability is awful or not happening. And so you start, for example, with a migration pattern of Strangler Fig, which was coined by Martin Fowler. And the idea is to start to slice something out of that monolith. And for example, a context, let's say in a messaging, for example, of your shop, and you just put it somewhere else, for example, in a cloud native environment, in another data center, multi cloud, whatever you want. Just choose your target, where you want to go, choose the, let's say, the architecture in what you want to go finally, eventually, and just take one piece at a time and put that to somewhere else and federate it with some kind of proxy federator to one application and do that step by step in baby steps until the old application doesn't appear anymore. So basically, you freeze your old application with only hot fixes but no features anymore. And everything you do is done in the new environment until the point the migration is done. And you only have the new tree, which basically took all the nutrients of the old one and like a parasite. And it's a bad term for that. But in reality, you have then this new
No, I
application.
think that's the
Yeah,
actual biological term is parasite, right? Because
exactly.
what to make the analogy a little bit clearer, you have a tree that exists, and then you have
Mhm.
another tree that kind of strangler fig comes onto one of the branches or onto one of the components of that tree, and then it kind of shoots one root down and steals those nutrients and then builds
Mhm.
another root and it kind of engulfs the old tree and takes over it um, and like you said just replaces the tree, right? So that's what we're talking about, legacy migration. We're taking single API call or single component by component and replacing one by one. um,
Mhm.
but in our analogy or in our infrastructure uh, idea, it's not so much a parasite as it is a plan and
Mhm.
a the way that you should be replacing things. I don't think there's really another way to do it and keep it deployed at all times. It's just that's just the best way to be doing it. So
You get into progress right after you've started the legacy
yeah,
migrations again, which is good for
because
business, good for everyone.
you always prioritize it correctly, right? So you're always going to take the API call that's most pertinent to the novel feature, right? So you have a new feature that you're trying to build, and you replace the API calls of the old things in the order in which it enables the newest feature that you need to build, right?
Mhm.
So you don't just migrate the legacy stuff just to migrate it and say, oh, now we're on the new version, right? Like you don't do that. You only do it if there's something that needs to be changed or there's something that's broken, right? Or something that
Mhm.
needs to be added. So, um, cool. So those were all the technical topics I think we were going to talk about. But you had mentioned you do some traveling into the woods, and you have this. you're living the dream. You know, you ask people what they want, and they're like, I want to live in the woods with no connectivity, and just like enjoy the s'mores on the oven roast. Um, but you're using some Starlink, and
Mhm.
apparently that's a SpaceX company, which is kind of cool. So, what kind of speeds do you get with Starlink? And tell me about your cabin in the woods. I'm gonna come visit you soon.
So I'm living next to the Black Forest in southern Germany, and
I
we
love that.
oftentimes just say with our camper van with my family, wife and two kids, we often jump the bus actually and just drive into the woods. And
Love that.
sometimes we just rent a cabin, sometimes several in a row. And it's just traveling, but I'm still working. It's not that heavy like in the office, but it's just calming down, being in the green, being in the forest, being outside. And when we have those cabins, we did, there's just electricity, some water, but everything else like heating you need to do by fire, to chop some wood and all this kind of stuff. And this is really what we like. And next to it, we basically put our Starlink, because in those areas, there's most of the time no good internet connection. But I still want to be there. I'm relying no. I'm relying actually on those internet connections, and with Starlink, you get really good results. When you have some free space above you, and that's quite interesting. So you can be basically outside. You can calm down. Especially when you have a lot of pressure in your IT environment. I'm entrepreneur, tech lead, employee. I have so much going on, and the forest does help me to get down. And this is
I
why I
believe
really
it.
love to sit in a cabin on, sometimes outside with my MacBook and just working, having Starlink
Yeah.
connecting me to all the others out
So
there.
the Starlink is just a satellite dish, but it's a
Hmm.
square,
It's a
and it
square,
doesn't
yeah.
even have concavity to it. It's just shooting up, and then you have to analyze the sky or your GPS location, and or does it know where it is, and then
It,
just
there are two modes actually. You have a residential mode where you need to set your location before you drive. 20 minutes later, you are online at this location, or you have some kind of roaming mode. I never used that, but then you don't need to do that, but it's reduced performance, reduced speeds. And when I use it, it's something between 200 and 250 megabits download. It's decent, 50 up, 30 to
wow,
50 up.
that's
Um,
awesome. Well,
and
talk to me about how you like orient the satellite because that's interesting to me.
Actually, you don't do that. You just make sure it does have a solid stand, and I think 45 degrees or something like that, and an angle free of view to the sky, and the rest is done by the dish itself. So it does correct every time, and
Understood.
it learns over the next 8 hours where the satellites are, and the connection goes better and better and better. I have several screenshots of that. I can send them to you.
Interesting. So it is motorized and it does
Mhm.
automatically. It's like a bunch of stepper motors that decide where the satellite points.
Yeah, exactly.
And can you tell me what network that's on? Like, what's the because I don't think SpaceX owns all the satellites, right?
I think it is like that.
I
So
can't imagine they own every single satellite.
they have several hundred satellites. I'm
Really?
not sure
Wow.
about the exact number, but they have this rows of satellites uh,
Interesting.
running around there. And in Germany, it's quite good cover.
I love that. That's really cool. Good stuff. Cool. So just give us a plug and then we'll sign off.
Mhm.
Where can we find you online? Is LinkedIn the best place or maybe someplace else?
LinkedIn, of course, my name, and the Snackable CTO. It's basically one name on Substack, which is my newsletter, where you get all the informations
Snackable
about the
CTO.
stuff we wrote.
Can we
Yeah.
just Google that?
Yeah, it's basically blog.snackablecto.coach, which because I'm
Awesome.
mentoring as well, other tech
Awesome.
leads helping
Well,
with those things we just talked about.
let's also spell your name for the listeners. So just spell your last name for us.
So Adrian Stanek, Stanek, actually.
Okay, great. Just want to make sure everybody can find you. Cool. So I have to say, don't subscribe. Stop listening to me, and go build your fucking company. Thank you, Adrian, for the time, and we'll catch up. We'll catch up in a bit
Thank you for having me. Bye bye.
for sure.